War has a way of changing the language of people. It hardens hearts. It turns human beings into labels. It makes us forget that before there is a uniform, before there is a flag, before there is a battlefield, there is a mother who raised a son, there is a father who prayed for his child, there is a family waiting for someone to come home, and this is where we must begin. Because if we begin anywhere else, we will lose our moral compass before we even start speaking about justice. When we talk about Iran and Israel, emotions rise quickly. Politics enters the room immediately. History enters the room. Anger enters the room. But above all of that, there must be one truth that remains untouched. War should never erase humanity. If war causes us to forget mercy, then war has already defeated us, even if we think we have won. If conflict makes us believe that cruelty is acceptable, then we have not defended our values, we have abandoned them. A prisoner of war is not simply a captured soldier. A prisoner of war is a human soul in a moment of complete vulnerability. He no longer holds the weapon. He no longer controls the battlefield. He is no longer in a position of power. And precisely because he is powerless, that is the moment our ethics are tested the most. It is easy to speak of justice when we are weak. The true test of character is whether we show justice when we are strong. This is why the treatment of prisoners of war matters so deeply, because it reveals who we really are. It reveals whether we are driven by principle or by revenge. It reveals whether our values only apply to those we agree with, or whether they remain firm even when facing those we oppose. If a prisoner is humiliated, tortured, starved, or used as a symbol of hatred, then we are not witnessing strength. We are witnessing a collapse of moral responsibility. And let us be honest, in times of war, people are tempted to excuse everything. They say, but look what happened to us. They say, but our side suffered too. And yes, suffering is real. Pain is real, loss is real, but pain does not give permission to become unjust. Suffering does not grant the right to strip another human being of dignity. If anything, suffering should make us more aware of what injustice feels like, not less. So whatever anyone thinks politically about Iran or Israel, one principle must stand above all arguments. Once a person becomes a prisoner of war, they must be treated not as an object of revenge, but as a human being whose dignity still remains sacred. In war, humanity must come before hatred. Once we accept that war must never erase humanity, then the next question becomes unavoidable. What does humanity actually require from us when a soldier is captured? It is not enough to speak emotionally. It is not enough to say we want justice. Justice must have rules. Mercy must have structure. Morality must have standards. And that is why the issue of prisoners of war is not just a matter of personal opinion. It is a matter of international law, human responsibility, and moral accountability before the world and before history. A prisoner of war is not meant to be treated as a trophy of victory. He is not meant to be displayed for humiliation. He is not meant to be beaten because people are angry. He is not meant to be tortured because the public wants revenge. The moment a soldier is captured, the battlefield changes, the weapon is gone, the fight for that individual is over. And from that moment onward, what begins is not domination. What begins is responsibility. This is why the world established laws to govern war, because even in conflict there must be limits. If there are no limits, then war becomes savagery. If there are no rules, then power alone decides what is right. And when power alone becomes the standard, then no one is safe. Today it may be your enemy in chains. Tomorrow it may be your own son. Today it may be a soldier from one nation. Tomorrow it may be a soldier from another. This is why principles matter, because principles protect everyone when emotions fail. When we speak about Iran and Israel, many people rush to defend one side or condemn the other. But on the matter of prisoners of war, the standard must be the same for all. If Iran captures, it is bound by moral duty. If Israel captures, it is bound by moral duty. If either side claims civilization, discipline, justice, or honor, then those claims must be proven in the way they treat those who can no longer defend themselves. And let us understand something very deeply. Law in this case is not weakness. Restraint is not weakness. Mercy is not weakness. To treat a prisoner with dignity when you have total control over him is not softness. It is strength of character. It is proof that your ethics are not temporary. It is proof that your values do not disappear the moment anger rises. Anyone can show force, but only the truly principled can show restraint when they possess force. This is why the treatment of prisoners matters so much in the eyes of the world. It is not just about what happens in a prison cell. It is about what that prison cell says about the soul of a nation. It is about whether that nation believes in law only when it is convenient, or whether it believes in law when it is difficult. It is about whether justice is real, or merely a slogan repeated in front of cameras. So if we speak honestly, then we must say this clearly. If Iran and Israel, or any side in conflict, claim legitimacy, then they must prove it by protecting prisoners of war with dignity, discipline, and justice. A prisoner of war is not a trophy of victory. A prisoner of war is a test of morality. And once we understand that war must never erase humanity, and that prisoners of war must be protected by law and moral responsibility, then we are forced to confront a deeper truth. This conflict between Iran and Israel is not just about politics, strategy, or military power. It is about what happens to human beings when nations choose confrontation over compassion. It is about what happens to ordinary lives when global headlines become personal tragedies. And that is why this issue cannot be reduced to slogans, alliances, or debates on social media, because behind every political statement there is often a broken family, a grieving mother, a frightened child, or a prisoner sitting in silence, wondering if the world has forgotten him. Too often, people speak about these conflicts as if they are chessboards. They analyze the moves, the threats, the responses, the regional implications. They talk about power, deterrence, retaliation, and strategic interests. And yes, these things matter in the language of governments. But the danger begins when we allow that language to become the only language. Because when politics becomes the only lens, the human being disappears. And when the human being disappears, then conscience disappears soon after. This is why we must say very clearly, the Iran-Israel conflict is not only a political issue, it is a human rights issue. It is a moral issue. It is a test of whether nations still recognize that even in hostility, there are boundaries that must never be crossed. Because once people are captured, once lives are placed in the hands of another side, once civilians are terrorized, once families are torn apart, we are no longer speaking merely about foreign policy, we are speaking about human dignity under pressure. We are speaking about the value of life in moments of rage. And one of the clearest ways to measure this is through the treatment of prisoners and detainees. Why? Because a prisoner cannot negotiate his own safety. A detainee cannot defend his own dignity. A captive is fully dependent on the conscience of the one who holds power. That is why the treatment of prisoners reveals more than military strength. It reveals moral discipline. It tells us whether a nation is governed by principles or by passions. It tells us whether justice is something real or merely a word repeated when convenient. Let us be honest, anyone can speak about rights when they are the victim. Anyone can demand mercy when they are suffering. But the true measure of civilization is whether you uphold rights when your enemy is weak and you are strong. That is where all slogans are exposed. That is where all public claims are tested. That is where history records who remained human and who allowed hatred to consume them. So when people ask, "What do you think about Iran and Israel?" my answer is this: I think no political cause, no strategic goal, and no national narrative should ever become so sacred that it blinds us to the suffering of human beings. Because once that happens, politics is no longer serving justice. Politics is devouring it. True power is not only winning a battle. True power is showing justice when you have control over another human life. And after all of this, after speaking about humanity, after speaking about law, after speaking about the suffering hidden behind politics, we arrive at the final and perhaps most urgent question: what now? If war creates prisoners, if conflict creates trauma, if hatred keeps multiplying pain, then what is the path forward? Are we meant to continue this endless cycle where one act of violence becomes the excuse for the next, and one generation hands its wounds to another generation as if pain itself were an inheritance? Or do we finally have the courage to say that there must be something greater than revenge? Because revenge has never healed a nation. Revenge has never returned a lost child. Revenge has never rebuilt a broken home. Revenge may satisfy anger for a moment, but it leaves the wound open. It keeps the fire alive. It teaches people to believe that cruelty is strength and that mercy is weakness. But that is a lie. Mercy is not weakness. Restraint is not weakness. Choosing peace when you have every emotional reason to choose retaliation, that is strength of the highest order. This is why prisoner exchanges, humanitarian access, and genuine efforts toward de-escalation matter so deeply. Some people dismiss these things as political transactions, but in reality, they are moments in which humanity pushes back against the machinery of war. When a prisoner is allowed to return home, that is not just diplomacy. That is a mother breathing again. That is a father weeping in relief. That is a child seeing a face they feared they had lost forever. These are not small things. These are sacred moments in a world that too often normalizes suffering. And if Iran and Israel, or any sides in conflict, truly want to claim moral seriousness before the world, then they must understand that power is not only demonstrated by military capability. Power is demonstrated by what you do when you hold another human being in your hands. Do you use that human being as leverage, as a symbol, as a message of intimidation? Or do you prove that even amid hostility, there remains a boundary your conscience will not cross? That is where honor lives. That is where dignity survives. Peace does not always begin with grand treaties. Sometimes peace begins with a single act of restraint. Sometimes peace begins when one side decides not to humiliate a prisoner. Sometimes peace begins when humanitarian organizations are allowed to enter. Sometimes peace begins when a captive is given food, medical care, a message from family, or the hope of return. These actions may seem small to politicians, but they are enormous in the moral scale of history. Because every act that protects dignity is an act that resists barbarity. So, if we are serious, truly serious, about ending this cycle, then we must stop glorifying endless retaliation and start honoring every step that protects life, returns prisoners, reduces suffering, and opens the door, however slightly, to peace, because war can capture bodies, but we must never allow it to capture our conscience. If war creates prisoners, peace must create their return.